Hi, my name is Larry Jordan, and welcome to Reading Video Scopes and Color Correction inside Adobe Premiere Pro's CS6. This is just the closest thing I know that comes to magic, being able to really take a look at what's inside our pictures, analyze them for grayscale and color levels, and then correct problems, whether it's something that's washed out or needs to have the time of day changed or we've got a color cast. When we're fixing problems or changing the look, that's where color correction gets involved, and that is what I want to talk about today. There are three principal scopes inside Premiere: the waveform monitor, the vector scope, and the RGB parade. The waveform monitor tells us everything we need to know about the grayscale value of an image, but nothing about color because it displays image grayscale values. The vector scope tells us everything we need to know about color, but nothing about black and white because it displays the color values of an image. And the RGB parade, it displays the amount of red, green, and blue in an image. It's basically three waveform monitors in the same scope, one showing the red channel, one showing the green channel, and one showing the blue channel. There are two parade scopes in Premiere. I prefer the RGB version. There are other scopes, but these three are the most important. When we talk color correction, we're always dividing the image into two sections: the grayscale values, how light or dark each individual pixel is, and the color values, what color, what shade, what hue and saturation each pixel is. When we talk grayscale, we talk ranges. There's 7 ranges. There's super white, which are white levels, grayscale values over 100%. And this grid that we're looking here is an enlargement of the waveform monitor. White levels, which are levels that are exactly at 100%, where the top of that green line is. Highlights, levels between about 65 and 100%. This is the lighter portions of the image. Midtones, also called mids and mid-grays. These are video levels between about 35 and 65%. Shadows, also called the blacks. Shadows are video levels between 0% and 35%. At 0 is black. That's where the video level is 0%. Blacks are as dark as any of your colors can go. Below that is super black, which are levels below 0. Super blacks can extend all the way down to -20, and super whites go to about 109%. You don't want to have levels over 100%, and you don't want to have levels below 0%. One of the things that we do in color correction is to make sure our white levels don't exceed 100%, and our black levels don't go below 0%. Notice over on the right is a vertical green bar. That vertical green bar represents the entire range of all the pixels in your image. Sometimes you can't see them on the scope, and the green bar helps you to see, do I have an extended range, in this case from 0 to 100%, or just a portion of that range. I want to divide the demo into two sections. Part 1 is reading scopes. So let me show you how to display the video scopes using the reference monitor, how to modify the video scopes, and how to use them to evaluate images. I have a series of clips here in the timeline, and if you look really, really closely, you don't see any video scopes. Well, we could switch the video scopes in the source monitor, but there's no way to relate the source monitor to the program monitor. We want to use a new monitor. It's in the window setting. It's called the reference monitor. The reference monitor allows us to link what we're seeing in the program monitor with what we're seeing in the reference monitor. And I've only got one open sequence, so I'll just select that. The reference monitor shows up here. You can control what the reference monitor shows by clicking on the wrench icon. We can see all of our scopes, or we could just see the vector scope, or one of the waveforms. The YC waveform is the one I do care for. The YCBCR parade is one that I don't particularly like. The RGB parade is the one that we'll use a little bit in color correction. We'll be saving some of that for another session, and then collections of different scopes. The vector scope tells us everything about color. The waveform tells us everything about grayscale, and the RGB parade shows us the relative levels of the red, green, and blue in the image. We look at them here. Let's look at them in an enlarged form, and we always start with the waveform. Of all the scopes, they're all important, but this is the most important. Notice here in our program monitor, we shade from white to black. And that's exactly what we see here. It starts at 100% white, and it shades, giving us every shade of gray until we get to black. That's what this gradient is. It represents every shade of black, white, and gray from the maximum white to the maximum black. As we look at the waveform monitor, these orange lines are how we measure levels. There's 0 right there, and if you look really, really carefully, you'll see a 0. And each one of these horizontal lines is a 10% increase in white level till we hit 100%, and then we go above it or go below it. There's the green bar that represents the entire spread of pixels from pure white to pure black. These three settings across the top, intensity allows me to change how light or dark this green representation is. This green thingy represents the value of every pixel in our image. When we were dealing in analog days, years and years ago, we needed to worry about setup. Setup is an NTSC thing where in an analog NTSC environment we had black levels set somewhere differently. Today, setup should always be off. You're working in a digital environment where black is at 0, white is at 100%. If you're laying off to analog tape like VHS or Beta SP, the device, the interface card, whether it's AJA or Blackmagic or Matrox or Canopus, will automatically add the setup. You don't need to worry about that. Setup should always be off. Chroma overlays the color information on the grayscale information. This is really helpful. I'm sure its mother likes it. It's useless to us. Be sure chroma is turned off. We're going to use the vector scope for measuring chroma. So the intensity, I generally have this set to around 40% because I want to see texture in the green. I want to see where the clumps of pixels are. That indicates where there's lots of pixels at that value. And I want to see where the pixels aren't. If they're all the same intensity, it's hard to see where the groups of pixels are and how to do shading. So I set my intensity to around 40. This is personal preference, whatever you want. Always turn off setup. Always turn off chroma. Let's take a look at another one of our scopes. Go down to the wrench. Let's go down and look at the RGB parade. This is essentially 3 waveform monitors. One waveform that shows the red, one waveform that shows the green, and one waveform that shows the blue. I mention this because it's really useful as we're trying to see where we have color casts or where there's problems by looking at the values in the RGB parade. However, today we're going to be concentrating principally on the waveform and the vector scope, which is the third scope I want to show you, which is this one. Notice I've got every shade of black, white, and gray here on the screen, yet it's reduced to a single dot in the center of the vector scope. Why? The vector scope only talks about color. The farther out from the center, the more saturated it gets. And the angle around the circle represents hue. Red is up here, and then magenta, and then blue, and cyan, and green, and yellow, back to red. There's 3 primary colors in video. There's red, skip 1, blue, skip 1, green, skip 1, back to red. Red, blue, and green. Opposite each of these 3 primary colors are secondary colors. The opposite of red is cyan. They're 180 degrees apart. The opposite of blue is yellow, also 180 degrees apart. And the opposite of green is magenta, not surprisingly also 180 degrees apart. So the angle represents the hue, and the distance out from the center represents saturation. Just as you don't want white levels to exceed 100%, you don't want chroma levels to become too oversaturated. If you imagine a line connecting the tops of each of these targets, it's roughly a rectangle, kind of a 6-sided rectangle. Okay, if you imagine a line connecting the tops of each of those targets, that represents the boundary between which is color safe inside the rectangle and oversaturated outside the rectangle. We'll see this a little bit more as we go through. Whenever we're analyzing images, you always look at the grayscale value first. So let's go back to the waveform monitor. And this is our first image. One of the neat things about the waveform monitors, we can say things like the left side of the picture is brighter than the middle, and the middle is brighter than the right-hand side, because I can make left and right statements by looking at the waveform monitor. And look at that. The left side is brighter than the center, and the center is brighter than the right-hand side. But I can't make top and bottom statements. I can't say the bottom of the picture is darker and the top of the picture is lighter, because up and down in the waveform monitor is grayscale. There's black, shadows, midtones, highlights, white, super white. So clearly I can say the left is dark, but I can't say if that dark is at the top, the middle, the bottom, or throughout the frame. We have no knowledge of that. The waveform doesn't tell us anything about it. Let's take a look at another image. Here, notice how I shade from black to shades of medium dark blue back to 40% blue. Okay, there's our black, there's the shading, and notice that we're starting to see textures here. There's a lot of pixels at the edge, but there's not so many pixels inside. I can get a clearly defined shape, and look at how many pixels are right here. I can say there's nothing over 40%. There's 0, 10, 20, 30, 40. It's right at 40%. I don't have anything over 40%. I can say it's a dark image. I can't tell you the color, because this only shows me grayscale, doesn't show color. The other thing I can say is the edges are darker than the center, but I can't say it's a circle. It could be a rectangle. It could be a triangle. It could be a six-sided figure. I don't know the shape. You can't tell content by looking at the waveform monitor. Well, let's look at some content and see where it takes us. This is a photograph of a very cold yard light. Look at this shaft of black right here. There it is. Look at that. There's no pixels way up here. It's all down here at 0. There's the highlight of the light. Right there's the light near the bottom of the frame, but near the top of the waveform. Again, we can't make up and down statements. We can only make left and right. There's the bar that goes of black that goes across the top on the left, the bar black on the right. It shades to dark wintry colors, but we've got a really nice range here. It's 100% white at the top, 0%, well, around 7% black at the bottom. This is called a high contrast image. A high contrast image is where there's a range of pixels from the very dark to the very light. Let's take a look at another one. Ooh, look at that sunset. Except that's not the image that the waveform sees. If I select this clip and go over to the Effects tab and go down to Image Control, that's what the waveform sees. It doesn't know color. It just sees grayscale. Now it says the brightest part of the image is just a little bit this side of halfway, right where the sun used to be. It's quite bright over here. Shades off rapidly as we go to the right-hand side. And look at those dark rocks in the foreground. They're essentially silhouettes. They're a flat line black right here at the bottom. There is no detail. There's a little bit of pixels right in here, which represents the darkness of the water. So or maybe some dark edges back here. But a nice range of pixels. But this is what the actual waveform sees. It doesn't see color over here. Look at this. Nothing really dark. It ends around 10%. The white levels, according to the green bar, top out near 95, but the clumps really end around 80. One of the things I don't like about the scopes in Premiere, it's really hard to see these numbers. And it's really hard to get accurate measurements unless you make it really, really large. If we enlarge this by pressing the tilde key, there we can see our numbers. We can see our black levels end right around 7%, and the bulk of the pixels end around 85, 87%. There's a few speculars that go up to about 97%. Take that back down again. We see our stonework over here. Look at that. A little bit of black right at the very bottom where the foliage touches the shore. But the white levels for the mountain are right here. They're 90%. We got some room to work. We can make that snap a bit more. Or look at this night scene. It's night, but look at the range of pixels that are extending way up. This has given us a full range of about 3% to 100%. And if we try to intensify that, look at all the pixels that are there. It may be night, but one of the things that makes this such a compelling night scene is that there's lots of contrast between the real dark of the river, this arc, which is the sky right there, and then all the lights coming off the buildings. One of the things you need to keep in mind is a scene that's shot at night needs to have more dark than light, but it can't all be a single value. It can't all be solid black. You wouldn't see anything. Well, let's try something a little bit different here. Oh, let's go to this one. This is a really important slide, really important. And the reason is, if we were describing this, writing about her in a book and writing a description, you would call her white or Caucasian. But look at the scope. She isn't white. Her sweater is white. That's her sweater way up here. And her top is black. That's her top right down here. But she's not black and she's not white. She's a mid-tone gray. Love that. There are no white people. There are no black people. There are a bunch of mid-tone gray people walking around. This is really important when you're trying to figure out how to get your skin tones to look right. You don't set her to pure white. You don't set her to pure black. If you want her to look normal, you set her to a mid-tone gray. At the end of this presentation, I'm going to give you a table of numbers to tell you exactly where to set mid-tone gray values for a lot of different ethnic types of people. We see that she's not white. She's not black. She's mid-tone gray. Well, let's go back and check the same thing with the vector scope. Now, we've already seen that whenever there's no color, the vector scope is a single dot in the center of the vector scope. As we move on, whoa, look at that. We have pixels that extend all the way from black, that's the center, getting more and more saturated the farther out it goes, because it's just barely saturated here, more saturated as we move in, and fully saturated as we get to the center. But there's nothing that says how big that blue circle is or where it's located in the frame. All I can say is I've got a wide variety of shades of blue in that image. Look at there. Look at how saturated this is, reaching out toward the target. Look how lack of saturated that is. A little bit of a gold spike due to the glowing light bulb there. But look at how it's not really reaching out very far. Also, as long as we're looking, look at how far out the red target goes in the cyan. Those are the most saturated. Look how not far out the blue and the yellow goes. We can't saturate blue and yellow as much as we can saturate red and cyan. And high-def specs, the Rec 709, has different saturation levels for all of these. So your targets are going to shift depending upon whether you're in NTSC or PAL, whether you're in standard def or high def. But the relationship, they all rotate around the circle. The hue is always determined by where their angle is of each individual pixel. And the saturation is always determined by the distance out from the center. But saturation levels vary depending upon NTSC or PAL or HD. Oh, look at that. That's our sunset. There's no chroma because we killed it. Well, let's go and turn that color back on again. Let's go to Effect Controls. We'll delete the black and white filter. Go back to the reference. Whoa, look at that. A little bit of a spot in the center due to those silhouetted rocks. And look at the yellow and the gold and the orange and the red and the magenta, the range of colors. And look at how there's nothing down here in the blues or the cyans or the green. Look at how heavily shifted that is toward all the colors of sunset. Or take a look here. The strong blue of the sky coming down here and the orange of the rock. A little bit toward green, but the pine trees on the edges are just barely saturated at all. They hardly move the meter. Same thing here. We've got a strong thrust toward blue because of the sky, but it's principally a gray image. A little bit of yellow due to the foliage right here, leaning a little bit toward green. There's the center. It's sort of shifted down to give us a little bit of a greenish cast, but not very saturated at all. Compare the lack of saturation in this image with whoa, look at that huge saturation coming off these flaming lights here and these bright orange, yellow, incandescent lights. Yellow and orange and gold, all moving between red and yellow. There's a foggy day, but we still have strong chroma levels. We've got magenta and red, yellow, blue, a little bit of green, Or look at this one. Not very bright, but the brightness or dimness, the grayscale value, it doesn't show up at all in the vector scope. Strong pulse toward red, strong toward yellow, heavy toward blue. And now we're back to our star again. Now we can't see the black top or the white sweater, but we can see her skin tone. See this line that goes up here? That's called the flesh tone line. The flesh tone line allows us to precisely control where skin tone is. Because if you look at your skin, if you've ever cut yourself, you know how the dead skin is gray. Well, what really gives our skin color is not the color of our skin, it's the color of the red blood under our skin. Skin is gray, just different shades of gray. This line represents the color of red blood under skin. And all of us have the same color red blood. So we're all going to be the same on the vector scope. What's going to change is the saturation, and what's going to change is the grayscale value, but not the color. Colors along this line. This line helps us to make sure that all the people that appear on camera have normal looking skin tones. If you're looking for ways to stretch your training dollars, membership is a great value. A subscription membership to our video training library saves you money. You can access all of our videos for a low monthly price of only $19.99. That's more than 500 movies, dozens of hours of training, all in-depth and up-to-date. Plus, members can attend all of our Power Up webinars for free. Our training covers Apple and Adobe software, and we update it every week. For more information, visit larryjordan.biz/subscriptions. This has been an excerpt of a recent Power Up webinar looking at reading scopes and color correcting inside Adobe Premiere Pro CS6. For the complete version of this online training, please visit our store at larryjordan.biz/store and look for webinar 90.